Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. This happened on New Year's. That day I stayed home completely alone. I had already spent Christmas with my family, and for New Year's Eve, I didn't have anyone to go out with or any plans with anyone, so I just stayed quiet at home. I had a couple of beers and put on the TV for the whole night. I watched the entire Times Square celebration and then switched over to some old seasonal movies. I wasn't especially tired, and around 2 a.m. I felt like getting up and doing something because I had basically spent all day sitting on the couch. I looked out the windows. It was snowing a little, but not too much. I knew it was cold and dark outside, but even so, a walk sounded incredibly nice. I grabbed my jacket, my hat, and my gloves, and went out to walk around the neighborhood. Right away, I noticed something. Outside was surprisingly quiet. Even though it was 2 a.m., I figured because it was New Year's, there would be parties, noise, movement, the usual. But no. The houses only had their outdoor Christmas lights on, and not a single car passed through the streets. Everything was calm, empty, and honestly, it felt very peaceful. I don't even know for sure how long I was outside. Obviously, I wasn't completely sober, so it was hard for me to track time. And I was also walking in a zigzag, without any clear direction, without a route or a destination. At some point, I ended up reaching the park. It looked like the path hadn't been cleared since the morning, but it seemed like there were only about 2 inches of snow, so I started walking down it anyway. I thought that little change of scenery would make the walk more interesting. I walked a bit before realizing 2 things. Not only was the snow harder to get through than it looked, but there also weren't any lights along the trail. I had walked that path at night before, and it usually had little lantern-style lights lined along the stretch. But I guess they shut them off in winter. So after a few minutes, I turned around. I was dragging my feet through the snow, walking maybe a minute back the way I came, when I saw something pretty strange. There was another set of footprints moving right alongside mine, and they were recent, from just a few minutes earlier. Someone had to have been walking behind me, and honestly, it looked like they were following me, because there hadn't been any shoe prints there before, but I didn't see anyone. And when I tried to figure out whether that person had turned around or where they went, I noticed the footprints left the trail and went into the dark areas, into a place where I couldn't make out absolutely anything. To me, someone could have been standing just 3 meters away, maybe 10 feet from me, and I wouldn't have had any idea, because it was completely black, total darkness. I picked up my pace to get out of there, even though I still wasn't convinced it was something serious enough to panic over. I'll admit I was probably a little buzzed and wasn't fully registering how weird and dangerous everything was, especially with those footprints leaving the path and heading straight into the darkness. In that moment, I tried to believe it was just a huge coincidence. Something odd, yes, but a coincidence all the same. I left the park and walked deeper into the neighborhood, not heading straight home yet. I walked for about 15 more minutes. It's not that I was looking that hard, but I didn't see anyone else, and by that point I thought there wasn't a problem anymore. When I finally got home, I took off all my winter clothes and thought about taking a shower to see if it would make me sleepy so I could go to bed. But it wasn't until I was halfway up the stairs that I realized something. Upstairs was way too dark, and the lights on the second floor were off. That completely caught me off guard, because I'm the kind of person who leaves all the lights on all day. That day I hadn't even gone upstairs since I got up in the morning. So without a doubt, I had left those lights on. I know this might sound like something stupid to fixate on, but I'm sure that even if I'd been totally drunk, I would have known those lights were on when I left. I climbed the last steps carefully, reached the hallway and looked down toward the end. And then I flipped the switch. The truth is, I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I still moved forward and just peeked my head into each room to see if there was anything obvious. After checking each room, I made sure to close every door when I was done. That's why when I checked the last room and turned to go back, I felt like my heart stopped. The first door, the one right next to the stairs, was completely open, wide open. To me, that confirmed 100% that someone was inside my house at that exact moment. I froze for a few seconds and then yelled, asking who was there. I was afraid to move. That person could have been in that room, or they could have quietly gone down to the first floor. And at that point, they could have been anywhere. I remember I started taking slow, careful, silent steps down the hallway, feeling the adrenaline and a heavy, horrible sinking feeling in my stomach as I got closer to the doorway. And then, I woke up. And no, this wasn't a dream. I woke up sprawled out on the floor in the middle of the hallway, with my head spinning and a brutal migraine. I think only about 10 minutes had passed between what happened before and that moment, and it was obvious I'd been attacked and knocked unconscious because I couldn't remember anything beyond the moments right before whatever happened to me. Even my vision was blurry, fading in and out like it was flickering. I called 911 immediately. Whoever had broken into my house and attacked me had been gone for a while, but I tried to tell the police everything I could remember. It still haunts me that a part of my memory just shut off like that. Most likely I was face to face with them, maybe even long enough to describe them well. Hell, I might have even known exactly who it was, but it's like my own mind is hiding it from me. After that night, the updates were minimal and nothing led to anything really important. I don't know who it was or what their real intentions were, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if their plan was for me to never wake up. Story 2. I work at a local ski resort in a small mountain town. My position is maintenance and partly security. In reality, most of my job consisted of cleaning and doing general maintenance tasks. But I also received some security training because in the past, several nighttime robberies had happened. Some people would sneak in to steal ski and snowboard equipment, and others would simply try to use the slopes when the place was closed. After several incidents like that, the company decided to change the schedule and started assigning 2 people to the night shifts. The idea was that we'd do our usual work while at the same time discouraging anyone who tried to come in without permission. We didn't have cameras or anything like that. Because of that, the security title in my position never really affected my day-to-day work. In fact, after we started working nights, months went by without anyone trying to break in again. The most that would happen was that someone might come up to the door and try to look inside, but other than that, everything was usually quiet. Also, like I mentioned, I never worked completely alone on those night shifts, or at least not in theory. My coworker, Matthew, was always assigned to the same shift as me, but he worked on the opposite side of the complex. The resort was divided into 2 large sections connected only by a long hallway. Sometimes days or even weeks would go by without me actually seeing Matthew. So even though technically I wasn't alone, most nights it felt like I was. That night had started like any other. I clocked in and started cleaning the main floor. During peak season, the place gets pretty dirty, so even though it wasn't an especially difficult job, there was a lot to do. The first hour went by pretty quickly. I was still in the main room when I heard something like a tapping, like someone was knocking on a window. I set my things down and walked toward the front, where most of the windows were. At first, I didn't see anything until I got closer to one of them and noticed footprints just below it, pressed into the snow. The tracks came right up to the glass and then wrapped around the building to the other side. Not really sure what to think, I put on my coat and went outside to take a look. I thought maybe it was someone lost, and if it wasn't, then I had to tell them to leave. But as soon as I stepped out, I saw the footprints continued from the window out toward the parking lot, which had already been cleared by the snowplow. From there, I completely lost the trail. I had no idea where that person had gone. It was pretty strange, but it was way too cold and way too dark to walk all the way around the building. I went back inside and got back to work, hoping whoever it was wouldn't come back. I'd say about 30 minutes passed. By then, the snow had probably already covered whatever tracks were left outside, so thinking about it didn't seem worth it anymore. Until I heard several doors opening in the hallway that connected the 2 sections of the resort. A few seconds later, Matthew appeared. He looked unsettled and a little confused when he saw me. Right away, he asked what I was doing. I looked at him, just as confused, and I simply told him I was working. Matthew nodded his head, like he accepted the answer, but at the same time it looked like it didn't quite add up for him. "Everything okay?" I asked him. He said yes, that he was probably just tired or something, while shaking his head. Before he left, I told him I'd seen some footprints outside in the snow and asked if they were his. He shook his head no. I expected that after I told him what I'd seen, he'd explain why he seemed so worried, because the way he was acting made it feel like something strange had happened to him too. But he didn't say anything else. He just left my section of the resort and went back to his. To be clear, Matthew and I weren't friends or anything like that. Like I said before, we almost never saw each other, so we weren't more than acquaintances. Plus, he was quite a bit older than me. When we talked, it was always only about work-related things. I mentioned this to give context for why I didn't question him more, or go over to his side of the resort to figure out what was going on. I kept working, but I spent a lot of the next hour thinking about how strange the night was turning out to be. And just when I thought the rest of the shift would pass without any more incidents, I heard a loud crash coming from the hallway that connected both sections. It sounded like a door slamming or something heavy hitting a wall. The noise was loud enough to make me jump and go check if Matthew was okay. I headed toward the hallway, but I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, so I continued into the other section where he worked, except Matthew wasn't there. "Matthew, are you okay?" I called his name over and over, but I didn't get any response. I started getting nervous, and when I reached the back of that section, I felt my stomach drop when I saw the back door was completely open. Snow was blowing inside, but it looked like the door had only been open for a few minutes. I rushed closer and looked outside. I didn't see anyone, but I did notice more footprints leading away from the building and heading up the resort in the direction of the chairlifts. There was no reason for Matthew to be going out that way, and that only made my anxiety worse. I shouted his name again, but the wind carried my voice away and it didn't travel very far. By that point, I was genuinely worried. I searched the entire inside of the building again, looking for Matthew, but I found nothing. The only clue was still the footprints in the snow. I ran back to my section, grabbed my coat again, and returned to the open door. I went outside and started following the tracks. They led me much farther than I expected. Outside there was total silence, only broken by the wind and the snow. There were no signs of anyone else. The footprints guided me to the base of the chairlifts and a little farther up a gentle hill. That's where I stopped. The footprints left the resort area and went into the trees along the edge of the hill. There were no lights or anything illuminating that area. As far as I knew, beyond that tree line there was only a normal mountain forest. My heart started pounding harder, and a creepy feeling took over. I started to feel like those footprints might not be Matthew's. "Matthew, are you in there?" I shouted. Several long seconds passed in complete silence. Then far back behind the trees, I saw a figure move and step into view, staring directly at me. From what little I could make out, it didn't look anything like Matthew. I ran as fast as I could down the hill and back to the resort, falling several times because my boots kept getting stuck in the heavy snow. Whoever was out there didn't chase me, but I knew they were watching me. I slammed the door shut and sprinted to the other side where the front desk was to use the phone and call the police. I didn't know what was happening, but I wasn't going to risk investigating on my own. As you'd expect in a mountain area, the police would take about half an hour to arrive. I hid in the room where they stored all the rental equipment during that time, listening to the wind outside and the unsettling silence inside the empty resort. I'd been waiting about 10 minutes when I heard what might have been a door opening at the other end of the building, but I didn't dare go check. After that, I didn't hear anything else until the police finally arrived. Disturbingly, the officers found another set of footprints leading back toward the rear door. That meant whoever had been outside had come back, maybe looking for me. It wasn't long before the police officially declared Matthew missing about half an hour later. According to the officers I spoke with, they found no signs of violence inside the resort, which led them to think it had been someone Matthew knew who convinced him to let them in, or who got him to go outside willingly. Either way, once the footprints went into the forest, there was no way to follow them. For a while, I'm almost sure I was considered a suspect. being one of the last people, if not the last, to see him. Over time, they were able to confirm I had nothing to do with it. The whole situation was genuinely terrifying, and it's hard not to blame myself a little for how everything happened. I feel like maybe I should have done more, but I also know that if I had followed the tracks deeper into the woods or tried to help in some other way, there's a good chance the missing person would have been me too. Story 3. This happened about 4 years ago during the end-of-year holidays. I had driven to a small town in Montana where my parents lived, planning to surprise them for Christmas. I stayed there for a full week and then started the drive back home. The full trip took around 16 hours, something I never thought was that terrible. I didn't mind stopping at rest areas and sleeping for a couple of hours if I needed to. I always felt that was more worth it than paying for a hotel or motel, especially since doing so would only make the trip even longer. I left in the afternoon a few hours earlier than planned because a major winter storm was supposed to be coming in. My idea was to get ahead of it and hopefully make it through before the weather worsened. I think it was after about 4 or 5 hours of driving when the storm finally hit. The road went from being practically empty and calm to being covered in snow within minutes. The wind was also very strong. It pushed the car around and hurled snow directly at the windshield. Even so, I didn't feel like I was losing control, and since there were no other vehicles on the road, I still felt relatively safe behind the wheel. However, after about an hour of driving in those conditions, I started to get exhausted, mostly because of the constant concentration the road required and because the snow was beginning to build up more and more on the pavement. Suddenly, my phone started sending alerts, an official winter storm warning. Just a couple of minutes later, I lost all signal. That was far more than I felt comfortable with, especially because if anything happened, I'd be completely cut off. So I decided to pull off the highway at the next rest area, a few miles ahead. It was a quiet, deserted place, tucked among trees, with a small snow-covered parking lot and a service building. There was only one other car parked there, at the far end of the lot. It looked like it had been there since before the storm started, because the roof was covered in a thick layer of snow. Just a few minutes after I stopped, the storm got even worse. It turned into a complete whiteout. I couldn't even see the other car anymore. The wind was so strong it was genuinely frightening. I couldn't imagine anyone driving in weather like that. A long, boring, uncomfortable hour passed while I sat inside my car waiting for the storm to let up. Eventually, out of both boredom and discomfort, I decided to get out and go to the rest area building to use the bathroom. The moment I opened my car door, the freezing wind and icy snow hit me so hard it was almost painful. I ran to the building and went inside quickly. Inside, there was a small lobby with a couple of benches, some brochures with road maps, and 2 doors that led to the bathrooms. Thankfully, the heating seemed to be working, so I stood in the lobby for a moment, warming up and watching through the windows as the snow continued to fall. I could barely make out the other car, still parked there with snow completely covering the windshield. It struck me as strange that it didn't appear to be running. I mean, it was below freezing outside, and if they didn't have the heat on, that person should have been freezing by now. After a minute, I walked over to the bathroom door and tried to open it. It only opened a little before slamming shut. I pushed again, and this time it barely moved at all. I stepped back. It wasn't like the door was locked. It was like someone was on the other side, physically preventing it from opening. I stared at the door for a few seconds, completely stunned and unsure what to think. It was very strange. I considered using the women's restroom, thinking that if whoever was in the men's room was the person from the only other car there, it probably wouldn't matter too much. But honestly, I no longer felt safe inside that building. I felt like something was wrong, like there was a reason someone was blocking the door like that. And I didn't want to test my luck, so I hurried out of the building. Just as I did, I heard the bathroom door open behind me, but I didn't turn around to look. I kept walking through the storm until I reached my car. By that point, the entire parking lot was completely covered in snow, and I wasn't sure if I'd even be able to get out. I wanted to leave, even if it was just to drive a few miles and stop somewhere else, but I was afraid of getting stuck trying to pull out. So I stayed inside the car, waiting for the storm to pass. I tried to think of any logical explanation for why someone would block a door like that, but honestly, I couldn't come up with one. Nothing that explained how that person knew exactly when I was coming in, or how they were already there, ready to stop me. Just a few minutes later, I noticed a silhouette beginning to form through the blowing snow, moving between my car and the building. It was a person, and just as they became clearly visible, they stopped and simply stood there, right in the middle of the storm. They appeared to be talking on a phone and were oriented toward me. I couldn't be sure if they were looking directly at me. They paced back and forth in that same spot for about a minute, still talking on the phone, before starting to slowly approach my car. They'd take a few steps toward me, then pause for a moment, like they were trying not to make it obvious. But there was a moment when they were much closer, and that's when I saw them clearly. They were looking straight into the car, directly at me. Suddenly, their face twisted into an unnaturally wide smile, and they began walking toward my window. They came right up beside the car and knocked on the glass, smiling disturbingly through it. I was genuinely terrified, and even though I'm embarrassed to admit it, I completely froze in fear. For a few seconds, I couldn't react at all. The man started hitting the window harder, practically pounding on it, so much so that I was surprised it didn't shatter. And then in the distance behind him, I saw another man come out of the rest area building and run toward the car. That's when I snapped out of it. I threw the car into reverse, but my heart dropped when the tires started spinning without moving. I wasn't going anywhere. The man kept getting closer, until suddenly the car jolted and finally got traction. I backed up and shifted into drive. In the exact second before I sped out of there, the man who had just arrived threw a knife directly at my windshield. It bounced off, but left a massive crack right in the center. I fled that place, praying I wouldn't lose control or get stuck on the road. I was convinced they would try to follow me, although as far as I know, they didn't. I drove dangerously through the storm until the weather began to improve and I regained phone signal. By that time, so much time had passed that when the police arrived at the rest area, they didn't find either of the two men. They did, however, find the car. It was still there in the middle of the parking lot, untouched. Contrary to what I had assumed, that vehicle didn't belong to either of the two men. It belonged to someone else. When the police showed me a reference photo of the owner, I didn't recognize him. In the days that followed, it came out that this man was missing. There was no trace of him at all. From what I heard, he was also on a road trip, and his family believes he stopped along the highway to sleep that night, but he was never heard from again. Honestly, I believe something truly terrible happened at that rest area just before I arrived. I think one of the men was outside watching, talking on the phone with the other, telling him to block the door when I came in. If I had forced my way into that building, I have a horrible feeling about what I might have found, and I'm almost certain they wouldn't have let me leave alive.